Hotel and welcome. Kemetic Legacy Today. Kemetic Legacy Today. Life, health, and strength to you all. Kemetic Legacy Today. Hotep. Kemetic Legacy Today.
Hetepu. Welcome to Kemetic Legacy Today, your weekly journal of ancient African, ancient Kemetic history and spirituality. My name is Jabari Osaze, also known as Heru Jedin Ma'at Atenra.
And my name is Anika Osaze, also known as Unfurkan Ma'at.
This episode, we're going to be having a conversation about a very important topic in Kemetic history, and that is the wonderful literature that comes to us from the Middle Kingdom. Generally speaking, when we think about ancient Kemetic history, historians have divided them into these more easily usable subsegments. So it's really difficult to talk about 3,000 years of anything, right? So what they've essentially done is they've decided that there's going to be the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, there are things that each of those kingdoms are best known for. And so the Old Kingdom is really where we see some of Kemet's wonderful monuments being built. Things like the wonderful Mir Kuti that are now misnomered the pyramids. Mm-hmm. The wonderful Giza Plateau, that's all from the Old Kingdom. And from folks who are not very familiar with Kemetic history, sometimes they're surprised that some of the things that Kemetic history are most known for, those things are not... those are things that don't come later in history. They come at the very beginning. Yeah. And so it's almost as if Kemetic history starts in perfection. And so some folks are surprised when they hear that those things that we're most familiar with, that are most iconographic about Kemet, come from the Old Kingdom. And then when we get to the Middle Kingdom, then we begin to see a flourishing of literature. And so certainly when we think of the Middle Kingdom, you think of some of the wonderful texts, some of which we'll be reading today. And then finally in the New Kingdom, we think about temples and Kemet as an empire. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of how we look at Kemetic history. I think it's very interesting that even though we think of Kemetic literature coming mostly from the Middle Kingdom, we don't generally hear many people who are familiar with these texts, these wonderful texts that give us a sense of the individuals, the personalities, the families that lived in this wonderful region.
Well, unfortunately, some of them have been destroyed.
That's
so
right.
We have some of the text, but not all of it, which means we have to make some basic interpretations of what we believe. The point of these literature pieces actually we're trying to get to. Right. But, it's very difficult. There are several translations for some of them. Some translations are better than others.
That's right.
So it takes time to actually go through each one.
That's right. And for those of you who are listening and may be part of either the Judaic or the Christian or Islamic faith and say, well, that's different. It really isn't. Because, there are many different translations of the Bible. We know that many people are familiar with the King James Version, but there are some folks that say the Aramaic version is more articulate. There are newer versions that are not written in sort of Old English. So when you're translating something that is old and you're trying to make it make sense for people who are living in a particular period that's far removed from it, it can sometimes be challenging. And so in this instance, as Anika is describing, some of those challenges are complicated by the fact that there are whole sections that are missing of some text. And then there are even some texts where there's what are generally called lacunae. You'll see that in some of the descriptions. Just small sections that are missing. It's almost as if you had a page in a book and some of the words were rubbed out. And so those are challenges too. Generally speaking, usually we're able to get a good sense of what's being said because some of those lacunae are not very large, but in some instances they are. So there are some challenges. But I still think that with all these challenges, folks, we don't want you to shy away from reading this wonderful treasure house, this wonderful collection of literature that comes from your ancestors thousands and thousands of years ago. But during this period, sort of coming from this intermediate period into the Middle Kingdom is when we see people really writing some really wonderful pieces. Pieces that I think that you'll find interesting because they relate to just being human on this planet. It's interesting that some of the issues that they were addressing are issues that we address today. For example, in one of the texts that Anika is very fond of, a discourse between, and it's called different things, but usually you'll hear it called a discourse or disagreement between a man and his ba, or sometimes they'll just say soul. We'll talk about that in a few moments. This particular text, many people say, deals with the concept of suicide. And it's one of the first texts ever to say that suicide is wrong. Now, there are other people that translate it completely differently, and they say it has nothing to do with suicide. It's an interesting debate that we're having about a text that's thousands of years old. And clearly the Kemites believe that you had a responsibility that came from within.
Okay. I am silent with the angry, patient with the ignorant, so as to quell strife. I am cool, free of haste, knowing the outcome, expecting what comes. I am a speaker in situations of strife, one who knows which phrase causes anger. I am friendly when I hear my name, to who would tell me his concern. I am controlled, kind, friendly, one who calms the weeper with good words. I am one bright face to his client, beneficent to his equal. I am a straight one in his Lord's house, who knows flattery when it is spoken. I am bright-faced, open-handed, an owner of food who does not cover his face. I am a friend of the poor, one well-disposed to the have-not. I am one who feeds the hungry in need, who is open-handed to the pauper. Wow. A lot has been said here. Just how to deal with difficult situations, how not to be angry, but to recognize anger and what can cause anger. I think that's very important. You know, thinking before speaking and knowing how to diffuse situations before they get out of control. Which is what I got from the first portion.
It seems like there are several categories of descriptions that he's giving to himself. He's saying that he's one who knows how to deal with people who are disagreeable. And he clearly says that that his way is to not speak in anger to the angry. And I think that this one's interesting. I'm not exactly sure what the translation means, but he says that he is the one who had food and did not cover his face.
I think I understand what he meant by that.
What do you think by that?
It says an owner of food who does not cover his face. I mean, I think that means that you don't hide your goods from others, that you're willing to share. That just because you have something, you don't try to keep it to yourself, or you're not afraid that others will ask you for it. That you actually make it clear that you have something to give and be willing.
You're saying that he's not the person that steps over the homeless in the street, or the person that pretends that he doesn't have anything so no one asks him for things.
Or pretends to be asleep when someone's coming through the train asking for donations.
Oh, how many of us in the New York area have done that on the train? You see someone asking for something, you're like, oh, it's time to act like I'm sleeping because I really don't want to be asked for money today. And so he's not that kind of person, that he was always open to hearing from folks who were in need, and he was willing to help them. You should know that when you see a tombstone today, often it describes who this person is. I know that today we usually have very general and very brief descriptions, but at very least sometimes they say he did this and he left this many children and a wife, and those are the kind of things that you would see on older tombstones. And that concept of putting some of the things that you should be remembered by on your tombstone is one that comes from Kemet. Now today we call these stele. or Stele for in the plural. Essentially, the Kemetic people would often put their contributions, their achievements on these sorts of things. And they were shaped very similar to the way that tombstones are today. And so the concept of the tombstone, if you watched our episode on Kemetic resurrection, you've seen how we talked a little. I don't think we really talked about the stele as much as we could have, but clearly we talked about the fact that the origins of what I called the mortuary culture, the culture of how we treat the dead, much of it comes from Kemet. And so as we read a stele and you hear about what kind of person, what kind of metal this man is made of, you're hearing about something that is sort of, it's a tombstone.
I am accurate like the scales, straight and true like Tehuti. I am firm-footed, well-disposed, loyal to him who advanced him. I am a knower who taught himself knowledge. I like that. An advisor whose advice is sought. I am a speaker in the hall of justice, skilled in speech in anxious situations.
That's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
That's beautiful.